Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, March 22nd, 2013. I'm talking about three stories, and just three stories only today in the wrap-up, but they're three big ones. Number one, the whole Cyprus banking crisis. Number two, President Barack Obama's trip in the Middle East and some of the things that are hanging over our head. And finally, the Fed's decision this week, which is not a surprise, is to keep on printing lots of money to prop up the economy. Let's start with this Cypriot banking crisis. A little country in the eastern Mediterranean. It's only a couple of tenths of a percent of the Eurozone GDP. You may think it's a small deal, but the whole world is this interconnected ball of junk. You know, they were going to take depositors' money, like 7% below 100,000 and, 10% above 100,000 euros. And, but they that voted down. And now they've come up with a deal. We'll protect the insured deposits, the little people. And, but the people who are uninsured, the uninsured accounts, the uninsured portions of that money, that's just kind of up for grabs. Read Russians, and some of which are connected to the KGB. Now, I don't care who you are or what people are doing with their money, laundering it or whatever. You can't just steal money from people. I mean, as if the United States doesn't have banks that launder money. I mean, HSBC in December, a $1.9 billion fine for what? They admitted to laundering money for Mexican drug cartels and Colombian drug cartels, and doing business and laundering money for countries on our terror list like Iran. I don't care who you are, you can't steal people's money. And if I was going to steal somebody's money, it wouldn't be anybody tied to the KGB. That's what could go wrong? You don't think they're going to hold a grudge? You don't think there's going to be consequences for this? They're working this thing out, and who knows what it's finally going to look like, but no matter what they come up with, I don't see how it works out to where the day they open the banks back up, which was supposed to be yesterday, incidentally, and they said, oops, no, it's next week. I think it's Tuesday, but that could change. On the day they open the banks up, I don't see how this works out where people aren't going to flood the banks, both physically and electronically, to remove all their money, thus imploding the Cypriot banking system. I don't see how that doesn't happen. And then what happens if they have capital controls that says, well, you can't take your money. Oh, you can only take out, 300 euros a week. Then they're going to tie up all that money, and that's really kind of a form of theft, where they just tie it up where you can't get it out. And what do you suppose the countries in, the other fringe countries in Europe that have had all this trouble, particularly Spain, which is the granddaddy of them over there, and a giant, debt problem with their housing over there. You've got other problems in Italy, Portugal, Ireland, and let's not forget Greece. French banks aren't doing very well either, last I heard. Great Britain isn't doing so hot either. They're calling for more quantitative easing of sterling, more money printing in Great Britain, because they can't stand the austerity. What happens when these people look at these Cypriots, where all the news reports where they're lining up at ATMs and there's no money, and lining up to the banks, and there could be capital controls and downgrades from S&P and Moody's, and what happens if they implode, and wouldn't that freak some people out? Don't you think that might cause some banking problems and run on banks in other parts of the European Union? Well, listen, what happens in Cyprus won't stay in Cyprus. My friend Gregory Manarino, who's a trader and an analyst, says that Cyprus is the spark that could light the fuse that sets the Eurozone on fire. I hope he's wrong, but I'm afraid he's not. President Barack Obama in the Middle East making a tour. The biggest stop, the stop of stops, is in Israel. They've had a tough relationship between Obama and Netanyahu, the prime minister. Barely cordial, although on this trip they look like they're, buddies. And yesterday Barack Obama gave a speech in Israel, and I got to tell you, I watched it all. I played some of it back. Masterful. He did a great job. Fantastic job. Really. I don't have any I can't poke any holes in his speech. I mean, he talked about a two-state solution, how the Palestinians ought to have their own homeland, how the Israelis ought to have the right to have their own homeland. He talked about Syria. That's a big problem. He talked a little bit about Iran and how, he'd like to give negotiations, diplomacy a chance, although he didn't outline any new ideas in diplomacy to get Iran to knuckle under and either change or allow inspectors into their nuclear program or whatever, to scale back that nuclear program, which the Israelis fear that one day they'll have a nuclear weapon and they'll use it on them. He didn't bring up Hamas, which is really only in a ceasefire in Gaza. That's to the south of Israel. The Syrian thing is a colossal mess. It is the Hatfields in McCoy, tens of thousands with 50, 60,000 dead already. And it's spilling into places like Turkey and Lebanon. And then the granddaddy question of them all is about Iran. And, recently the president said that, we're not going to give you unlimited time. You don't have unlimited time. He also said recently that, he said that in his speech too, that we're not going to give you unlimited time and we have, Israel's back. But he also said that Iran may have a nuclear weapon within a year and he, quote, we don't want to cut that too close. And again, there were no new outlines, ideas for how to use diplomacy with Iran to get them to scale back or stop or change this nuclear program. Meanwhile, the leader of Iran said that if his country is attacked, this was yesterday, if his country is attacked, he will level Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities. Does that sound like we're headed for peace in the Middle East to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. I didn't even put this story on my site this week. The Federal Reserve, they had their big meeting this past week, and they decided to keep printing money. Wow, what a surprise. And you would think, you keep hearing this, we're going the right way. We're having this recovery. We have a recovery. Have you heard this recovery word enough? Since I've been doing my website in 2009, I've been saying there's no real recovery. I think John Williams at shadowstats.com said it best when he said, it's just bottom bouncing. That's all it is. We had a recovery in 2009. We had a recovery in 2010. More recovery talk in 2011. More recovery talk in 2012. And 2013, more recovery talk, and you would think that the economy's just going great. New market highs, and here's the way they portray this, for example, the mainstream media. I'm using USA Today. Fed to keep goosing economy. Fed to keep goosing economy. Like, they're just pushing it up a little bit, and what can go wrong? Never any real hard questions about, hey, what happens if we print too much money? History is clear about what happens when you print too much money. You have inflation, and you could have hyperinflation, and the wheels could come off your economy. I mean, imagine living in a country where your money goes poof, right? They never talk about the downside of printing $85 billion a month, $40 billion for the banks, $45 billion to buy treasuries, our own debt. That's $85 billion a month times 12. That's more than $1 trillion a year. What could go wrong? Never any type of comment or commentary or introspective on, hey, maybe we shouldn't be, we had QE1 that didn't work, QE2 that didn't work, QE, the Operation Twist, now QE, open-ended QE. 0% interest rates. You talk about stealing money from people. Well, the nice way to do it is to set the interest rates to near zero and give them below inflation money on their money, interest on their money. Some people say that's like stealing $400 billion a year out of the American economy. It destroys capital because there's no interest to live on. You got to start eating the eggs, right? You don't eat eating the chickens. Just take the eggs, right? And then Ben Bernanke says that, hey, there's no bubble in the stock market. Wow, let's see. What did he say back in 2005 about the housing market? There wasn't a bubble. And then when cracks started happening and fissures, he said, well, it's subprime and that'll be contained. That'll be contained. The housing market, it'll just be subprime. You saw how well that analysis worked out. And now he says there's not a bubble in the stock market. People like Paul Craig Roberts not only says there's a bubble in the stock market, there's a bubble in the dollar, and there's a bubble in the bond market. And tie this all back around to Cyprus, this little country, this little black swan that could cause people to lose confidence in their banks with fractional reserves in the bank. You know, your bank doesn't have all this money here in the U.S. They don't have every dime that's in the bank. They loan that out. Remember, It's a Wonderful Life? And they're having a run on the bank, and he says, your money's in Mr. So-and-so's house, in Mr. So-and-so's business. Well, they fractional reserve. Your money's not there. Everybody can't go to the bank and get their money out. But if that happens, it's going to be a calamity, no matter where it happens. Finally, I just want to thank everybody who comes to the site and comments. I appreciate all that. I like the debate. I like the comments. They're lively. I appreciate the folks that use the donation button because it helps offset the cost of the site. And that's a big help. It offsets some of the costs of the site. Well, that's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for supporting USAWatchdog.com.